My name is Selena, and I'll never forget the night my sister tried to reduce me to a punchline. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're on the right side. Anyways, we were at one of those long family dinners, the kind where the table was stretched to its limit with food and noise. Glasses clinked, conversations overlapped, and everyone seemed more interested in showing off their best stories than actually listening. I was used to it by then, used to being the quiet one, the overlooked one, the sister they all thought was still finding her way. But then, in that crowded room, my sister Clarissa leaned back in her chair with that smirk she always wore when she was about to take a shot at me. She waited until the chatter had died down just enough for her voice to carry. Her boyfriend must be poor and ugly, she sneered, gesturing toward me with her glass. The words dropped like a spark in dry grass. The laughter came instantly. A burst from the cousins, a chuckle from my uncle, even a soft laugh from my own parents. My father shook his head, half amused, and my mother covered her mouth as if trying not to grin too wide. They thought it was clever, just another one of Clarissa's sharp little jokes that made her the center of attention. No one saw the way my stomach twisted, or the way my hands froze in my lap, gripping the fabric of my dress until my knuckles turned white. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way the room erupted around it, as if my life and my worth were fair game for their entertainment. Their laughter echoed in my ears, drowning out every thought except one. They really believed it. That was how little they thought of me. That was how easy it was to dismiss me as nothing. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to remind them of the things I'd accomplished, the life I had built quietly while they pretended not to notice. But instead, I swallowed it. I let the laughter roll past me like a storm, and I stayed silent. Because while they thought they were laughing at me, I was holding on to something they knew nothing about. Clarissa looked so smug, basking in the glow of her own cruelty. She thought she had won, that once again she had proven herself to be the golden one, the star, the sister who shined by making me small. And everyone else? They followed her lead like they always did. It was easier for them to laugh than to see me, easier to pile on than to pause and realize the damage those words caused. But here's the part they didn't know, the part that made my silence sharper than any words I could have said. I wasn't single. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't clinging to scraps of affection. I was in love, with a man who was not only handsome, kind, and fiercely supportive, but who had built a fortune of his own. Adrian wasn't just my boyfriend. He was proof that everything they believed about me was wrong. So I let them laugh. I let them mock, because I knew the day would come when their laughter would die in their throats, and Clarissa's smirk would vanish the moment she realized the joke was never on me. It was always on them. From the outside, my family looked flawless. We lived in a spacious suburban home with a perfectly trimmed lawn and flower beds that my mother fussed over like they were her children. On Christmas cards, we wore coordinated outfits. My father in a sweater vest, my mother in pearls, Clarissa in a red dress that shimmered under the lights, and me in whatever outfit my mother had deemed presentable. The photos always captured wide smiles and matching poses, the kind of glossy image neighbors would gush over. At church on Sundays, we were the family people pointed to as an example of togetherness. My parents shook hands and exchanged greetings with pride. Clarissa played the role of the charming daughter who could do no wrong, and I stayed quietly at their side, careful not to ruin the picture. Outsiders always told my parents how lucky they were, how beautiful their daughters were, how blessed they must feel to have such harmony. But those people never stayed long enough to see what happened once the front door closed behind us. Inside, the harmony fractured. Clarissa was always the favorite. She didn't just get attention, she commanded it. When she walked into a room, my parents lit up like someone had turned on a switch. Her smallest achievements, an A on a test, a compliment from a teacher, even her choice of outfit, were celebrated as though she'd won an Olympic medal. My achievements, they barely registered. If I brought home an A, my father might nod. But if Clarissa did the same, they'd take her out for ice cream to celebrate. If I tried to share good news, the conversation would somehow pivot back to her before I'd even finished my sentence. It wasn't that they hated me. That might have been easier to accept. No, their treatment was subtler, quieter, almost invisible to outsiders. I was second place in my own home. If Clarissa was given the best seat at the table, I was told not to make a fuss. If she got new clothes, I was expected to be satisfied with hand-me-downs or clearance racks. If she interrupted me mid-story, they laughed at her wit, instead of noticing how it silenced me. Every day was a reminder that I existed to fill space in the picture, nothing more. The illusion was powerful, though. Whenever extended family visited, my parents paraded Clarissa in front of them, bragging about her talents, her charm, her endless list of admirers. They introduced me too, of course, but always as an afterthought. "And that's Selena," they'd say, as if my name was just a footnote. I grew up learning how to fade into the background, how to smile when I felt invisible, how to nod when I wanted to scream. To everyone else, we were the perfect family. But perfection is a performance, and ours was rehearsed to perfection. Only I knew the truth, that behind the polished photographs and Sunday smiles, favoritism had carved a permanent divide. And I was always the one on the wrong side of it. Clarissa had been the star of our family for as long as I could remember. Even as kids, she had the kind of beauty people stopped to notice. Golden hair that seemed to catch the light just right. A smile that looked rehearsed but effortless, and a charm that drew people in before she even spoke. At every gathering, she was the one relatives hovered around, the one neighbors gushed over, the one my parents bragged about as if she were proof of their success as parents. Her beauty was only part of it. Clarissa had a way of making every story sound more exciting, every event feel like it revolved around her. She'd recount tales from school or later from college, and the table would light up with laughter and admiration. My father leaned forward when she spoke. My mother hung on her every word. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, trying to contribute when I could, but my voice always seemed to get lost under hers. Her dating life became another stage for her to shine. From high school onward, Clarissa always had someone. Boys who drove nice cars, boys with polished smiles, boys who seemed to match her aura of perfection. My parents adored them, treating her boyfriends like members of the family before they'd even been around long enough to earn it. They praised her for being so loved, so wanted, so perfect, as though having admirers validated her worth. And of course, in their eyes, it did. For me, it was the opposite. If I wasn't dating anyone, it became a subtle joke. "Selena's just too focused on work," my mom would say with a smile, as though covering for me. If I did mention someone I liked, the questions came sharp and fast. What does he do? Where does he live? Does he make enough money? Clarissa's choices were praised no matter how shallow they were. Mine were interrogated, minimized, or dismissed altogether. It wasn't just my parents either. Relatives mirrored the favoritism. At family reunions, my aunts would fawn over Clarissa's outfits, calling her gorgeous, asking for updates on her perfect life. When it came to me, their comments were polite but perfunctory. "How's work?" "You look nice, Selena," before their eyes shifted back to her. It was like standing in the same spotlight but being cast in permanent shadow. And yet, While Clarissa was idolized, my own strength went unnoticed. I was the one who worked long hours, who quietly saved, who built relationships with people who valued me for more than appearances. But those things didn't sparkle in the way my family craved. They didn't make for flashy stories at the dinner table or polished photos on social media. They weren't the kind of success that could be paraded around. Clarissa was the golden child, and I was the invisible one. Every word of praise she received was another reminder that in my family's script she was the star, and I was just an extra. They never imagined that the strength they ignored in me would one day outshine all of her borrowed glamour. It wasn't just one dinner, one cruel comment, or one moment of laughter at my expense. It was years of small, sharp put-downs that carved deep into me, each one brushed off as just a joke, while I sat there swallowing the sting. Clarissa had a talent for disguising cruelty as humor, and my parents had an even greater talent for pretending not to notice. I remember being 15, standing in front of the mirror before a family outing. I had saved up my babysitting money to buy a simple blouse I loved, nothing flashy, but something that made me feel grown up. The moment Clarissa saw me, she smirked. "That's cute, looks like something from the clearance bin." My mother laughed softly and said, "Well, at least she tries." I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. It was the same pattern over and over. Whenever I showed up in something I liked, shoes, a dress, even a coat, I knew Clarissa would find a way to cut me down. "You're brave to wear that," she'd say, eyebrows raised. Or, "Don't worry, not everyone has to be fashionable." And instead of telling her to stop, my father would chuckle and say, "Clarissa, don't be mean," in a tone that sounded more amused than disapproving. As I got older, the jokes shifted. They weren't about clothes anymore. They were about my life. Clarissa always had someone to bring home, someone polished enough for my parents to gush over. I, on the other hand, was single through most of my 20s, focusing on building my career. But to them, that was just another punchline. At brunch, Clarissa once leaned across the table with a mischievous grin. "So, Selena, do you have a date with your laptop tonight?" The table erupted with laughter, my parents included. My mother shook her head with a smirk and added, "She's married to her work." They thought it was clever. I thought it was cruel. Even my career itself wasn't spared. I had worked hard to climb the ladder, earning responsibilities that others my age hadn't yet touched. But when I tried to talk about it, Clarissa always found a way to belittle it. "That sounds boring," she'd interrupt. I could never sit at a desk all day. My father would laugh and say, "Well, someone has to do the boring jobs." And just like that, everything I had achieved was reduced to a joke. It wasn't just the words, it was the way the room joined in. The way my parents smirked, the way relatives nodded, the way my voice was drowned out by their amusement. Every put-down reminded me that no matter how much I tried, I would always be the shadow in Clarissa's spotlight. These weren't harmless jokes. They were tiny cuts that added up over years, leaving scars no one else could see. And the worst part wasn't Clarissa's cruelty. It was the silence of the people who were supposed to protect me, the people who laughed instead of defending me. That silence told me louder than words. In this family, I would never be enough. The night of the dinner is burned into my memory. The table was set like it always was for big family gatherings, platters of food filling every inch of space, glasses clinking as relatives toasted to nothing in particular, the hum of overlapping voices rising and falling like waves. On the surface, it was warm, inviting, even picturesque. But for me, it was just another night of sitting quietly while Clarissa dominated the room. She was in her element, laughing too loudly, telling stories that made her sound brilliant and charming. My parents leaned toward her, hanging on every word. I tried to keep my head down, listening, contributing when I could. But I knew how this game went. It was her show, and the rest of us were just extras. And then, out of nowhere, she decided I would be her next punchline. She leaned back in her chair, smirked at me, and said loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "Her boyfriend must be poor and ugly." The words sliced through the noise, sharp and deliberate. For a split second, there was silence, like the room was holding its breath. And then the laughter came. A burst of it, rolling around the table like a cruel wave. My uncle slapped the table. My cousins snorted into their drinks. Even my parents, the people who were supposed to defend me, chuckled with knowing looks, as though Clarissa had just said what they all believed to be true. I froze. My fork hovered in midair. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't trust my voice to work. I wanted to defend myself, to call out the cruelty, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They would twist my anger into proof that I couldn't take a joke. They would roll their eyes, pat Clarissa's hand, and remind me I was being too sensitive. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to sit there. My pride cracked under the weight of their laughter, each chuckle reminding me how little they thought of me. On the outside, I stayed still, my face neutral. But on the inside, something broke. The hurt was sharp and humiliating, but beneath it was something else, a spark of defiance that I clung to. Because here's what none of them knew. I wasn't alone. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't the pathetic figure they loved to imagine me as. I was already in love, deeply and truly, with Adrian. He was kind, brilliant, the kind of man who saw me for everything I was and more. And yes, he was wealthy, far wealthier than anyone at that table could dream. He didn't flaunt it the way my family idolized, but he had built a life of success and independence, and he shared it with me in ways that made me feel cherished, not compared. So while they laughed, I smiled secretly to myself. Let them have their moment. Let them think they had cut me down again. Because one day, the truth would stand in front of them, undeniable and radiant. And when that day came, it wouldn't be me who looked small. It would be them. I sat there for as long as I could stand it. The laughter faded into chatter again, the conversation moving on as if nothing cruel had just been said, as if my dignity hadn't been stripped away in front of them all. Clarissa was back to telling one of her stories, basking in the attention, while my parents nodded along with indulgent smiles. It was as though my humiliation had been nothing more than a momentary bit of entertainment to fill the evening. I kept my eyes on my plate, pushing food around with my fork, trying to swallow the lump that still sat heavy in my throat. Every word they spoke felt muffled, every laugh like a fresh reminder that I didn't belong at this table. Not really. My chest ached, and part of me wanted to slam my hand down, shout, demand they hear me for once. But another part of me knew better. I had done that before, tried to defend myself, and every time it ended the same. I was called dramatic, sensitive, overreacting. So this time, I chose something different. Quiet. I placed my fork gently on the plate, folded my napkin beside it, and stood. No scene, no tears. Just a simple decision that I wasn't going to sit there 1 second longer, offering myself up as the butt of their jokes. "I think I'll head out early," I said, my voice steady. A few faces turned toward me, more curious than concerned. My father barely glanced up. My mother gave a dismissive, "All right, dear." And Clarissa, of course, smirked like she'd won. But what none of them realized, what made that smirk meaningless, was that I was carrying something they couldn't imagine. Yes, their words stung, more than I cared to admit. The echo of their laughter followed me as I walked down the hall, grabbed my coat, and stepped into the cool night air. But underneath the sting, I felt a flicker of something else. Power. Because while they thought I was leaving in defeat, I knew I wasn't. I was leaving with the comfort of a secret they had no idea about. Adrian, the man they assumed didn't exist, or if he did, must be poor and ugly. The man they thought was a figment of my desperation. If only they knew. If only they could see the truth. That the person they mocked me for imagining was not only real, but everything they pretended Clarissa deserved and more. I walked to my car with my head high, even if my heart ached. Their cruelty hurt, but it didn't define me anymore. I didn't need to prove myself at that table. I didn't need to beg for space in their carefully staged picture. One day, when Adrian stood beside me, when the truth of the life I had built revealed itself, their laughter would die in their throats. For now, I let them think they had won. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the first step toward a victory they wouldn't see coming. The truth is, my family had no idea who I really was outside of their narrow script. They saw me only at dinners and holiday gatherings, where I played the quiet one in Clarissa's shadow, too tired to fight for space at a table where my voice was never welcome. To them, I was struggling, barely holding my life together, too plain and too invisible to matter. But beyond those walls, in the world they never cared to ask about, I was someone entirely different. My days were full, yes, but not empty. I worked in a field they barely understood, managing accounts and projects for clients who trusted me, who valued my judgment, who respected my hard work. My name carried weight in conference rooms, where colleagues leaned in when I spoke, and leaders listened to the strategies I proposed. It wasn't glamorous in the way Clarissa's stories sounded, when she boasted about parties or social events, but it was solid, steady, and mine. I had earned it through long hours, sharp focus, and the refusal to give up even when things got hard. My apartment was small, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, decorated with care and warmth. I had built a sanctuary there, a place where I could breathe without judgment. My shelves were lined with books that inspired me, my walls filled with photos of moments my family never knew about, vacations with friends, celebrations with colleagues, quiet memories of laughter that didn't come at someone else's expense. I had also been smart with my money. While they mocked me for being practical, I had quietly built savings, invested wisely, and created a safety net that meant I didn't live in fear of what came next. They thought I was barely scraping by, when in reality, I was standing on a foundation far stronger than their showy illusions. They saw my modest clothes and assumed I was small, when really, I was simply choosing not to flaunt. And then there were the people in my life, the ones who actually cared. Friends who called to check on me after long days, who celebrated my milestones without comparison. Mentors who told me they admired my work ethic and vision. Co-workers who cheered when I got promoted, who saw me as capable and strong. They weren't blood, but they were family in the truest sense of the word. They showed up for me in ways my own never had. It struck me often, the irony of it all. My family, so proud of their perfect image, never bothered to see beyond their own narrative. They never asked what my life looked like, what I was building, who I was becoming. To them, I was a supporting character, a joke waiting to be told, but in the world outside their walls, I was respected, valued, and quietly successful. The life they thought was small was bigger than they could ever imagine. And one day, when the truth finally came to light, they'd realize just how blind they had been. What my family never knew, what they never even suspected, was that while they laughed at me, While they sneered about how my boyfriend must be poor and ugly, I already had someone in my life who shattered every assumption they had. His name is Adrian. I met him through work, not in some dramatic way, but in the kind of moment that feels ordinary until you look back and realize it changed everything. He was in the office one day as a client, and unlike most people who rushed through conversations, he stopped to ask my opinion. Not just politely, but like he genuinely cared what I had to say. From the beginning, he treated me like my thoughts mattered. It was disarming, and I'll admit, I didn't quite know what to do with it at first. Adrian is the kind of man people notice when he walks into a room, tall, sharp, with eyes that make you feel like you're the only person there. Handsome doesn't even begin to describe him. But what struck me most wasn't his looks. It was his kindness. He listened when I spoke. He laughed at my jokes like they were the best he'd ever heard. He made me feel seen, really seen, in a way my own family never had. It wasn't long before I learned more about him, that he wasn't just successful, he was extraordinary. He had built his own fortune, not by inheritance, but through grit, vision, and a mind that never stopped creating. A millionaire, yes, but you wouldn't know it from the way he treated people. He didn't flaunt his wealth. He didn't use it as a weapon. He saw it as freedom, not status. And with me, he wasn't trying to impress. He was simply himself, and he wanted me to be myself too. We kept our relationship private, not because we were ashamed, but because I knew what my family would do if they found out. They'd poke, they'd prod, they'd twist it into something ugly. They'd either try to claim credit for me, landing someone like him, or they'd look for ways to tear it down, the way they always did with anything that didn't fit their version of me. So I kept him to myself, tucked away like the most precious secret I'd ever had. Adrian never pressured me about it. He understood. He'd hold my hand across the table when we went out to dinners, brush the hair from my face when I was tired, remind me in the quietest ways that I was worth more than I'd ever been told. He called me his treasure, not because of what I did or how I looked, but simply because of who I was. The irony was sharp. While my family sat at that dinner table mocking me, laughing at the idea that I could ever be loved by someone remarkable, I already had more than they could dream of. I had love, I had respect, and I had Adrian. The joke was never on me. It was always on them. With Adrian, everything felt different. Not because of the car he drove, or the house he lived in, or the kind of bank account that could silence every cruel joke my family ever made. None of that was what mattered. What mattered was how he made me feel when the world wasn't watching. When it was just the two of us in the quiet of a shared evening. For the first time in my life, I was with someone who didn't treat me like I was second best. Adrian noticed things no one else ever had. If I seemed tired, he'd remind me it was okay to rest, that slowing down wasn't weakness. If I achieved something at work, he celebrated like it was monumental, clapping me into his arms and making me feel like the whole world should know. When I doubted myself, he never brushed it off or told me I was being dramatic. He listened, he reassured, and then he reminded me of every reason I deserved to stand tall. I remember one evening, sitting across from him after a long week. I had my hair in a messy bun, no makeup, one of his hoodies drowning me, and I muttered something about how I didn't look like much. He leaned forward, brushed my cheek with his hand, and said, "You look like the woman I love. That's all I see." It wasn't a line, it wasn't for show, it was the truth, and I felt it settle deep inside me. For so long, I had measured myself against my sister's shadow, against a family that made me believe I was always less. But with Adrian, I began to understand that my worth was never theirs to decide. He didn't just tell me I was enough, he showed me in every action, in every look, in every small kindness, He made space for me to grow without fear of being cut down. The change in me was quiet at first. I started laughing more, real laughter that wasn't guarded. I spoke with more confidence at work, not shrinking in meetings, but stepping into my voice. I carried myself differently, no longer hiding in clothes meant to blend in, but wearing what made me feel like me. Adrian wasn't the reason I was strong, but he was the reminder that I always had been. He was the mirror reflecting back the parts of me my family refused to see. Loyalty was what sealed it. Adrian wasn't just around when things were easy. He stood by me on the hard days too. The days I cried over memories of dinners where my parents looked past me. The days I questioned if their laughter would ever stop haunting me. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't minimize it. He simply stayed. That kind of steady love was worth more than any mansion, any trip, any display of wealth. Under his love, I blossomed. Not because of what he had, but because of how he saw me. For the first time, I saw myself too, and I knew I was never the person they made me believe I was. It started as whispers, the kind of murmurs that drifted through relatives and acquaintances when they thought no one important was listening. At first, I dismissed them. Clarissa had always been the golden one, the center of every story, the star no one dared question. But slowly, the shine that she had so carefully polished began to fade. I heard it first from a cousin who pulled me aside after a chance meeting in the grocery store. "Did you know Clarissa and Daniel aren't doing well?" she whispered, as though speaking too loudly might crack the illusion completely. I blinked, trying to mask my surprise. Clarissa had always paraded her relationship like it was a trophy. Perfect dates, perfect gifts, endless photos online of weekend getaways and candlelit dinners. But behind the posts, there was strain, arguments, the kind of fractures that couldn't be hidden forever. Then came the rumors about money. Clarissa had always flaunted her lifestyle, designer bags, luxury vacations, dinners at the kind of restaurants you had to book months in advance. She made sure everyone, especially me, knew how glamorous her world was compared to mine. But whispers hinted that things weren't adding up. A missed payment here, a credit card stretched too thin there. Some relatives quietly admitted they had lent her money, though they'd never dare say it to her face. Even her job, the one she bragged about at every family dinner, wasn't as solid as she claimed. A friend of a friend let slip that her performance wasn't matching her confidence, that superiors were starting to notice she relied more on charm than on work ethic. The cracks were showing, and the people who once praised her without hesitation were beginning to question what they saw. For me, it was a strange mix of emotions. There was no joy in seeing someone's life unravel, but there was something sharp, almost vindicating, about watching the truth seep through the cracks of her polished facade. For years, Clarissa had used me as her punchline, her way to lift herself higher by pushing me lower. She had built her golden image on my silence, on my family's complicity. And now that image was trembling. I noticed it too, in her eyes when I happened to see her. Behind the smirk, there was strain. Behind the confidence, a flicker of fear. She worked harder to convince everyone she was fine, posting even more online, staging bigger smiles, louder laughs. But I recognized the performance. It was the same performance my parents had perfected for years. The act of perfection that fooled outsiders but never fooled those who knew where to look. For once, I wasn't the one being laughed at. The same relatives who used to chuckle at Clarissa's jokes about me were whispering about her behind her back. The pedestal she had lived on was shaking. And while I didn't need her downfall to validate my worth, I couldn't ignore the truth. The Golden Sisters' shine was dimming, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the shadow anymore. The call came on a Tuesday night, just as I was getting ready for bed. My phone lit up with my mother's name, and for a moment I thought it was a mistake. She rarely called me, unless it was to pass along news about Clarissa or to remind me about a family event I wasn't really wanted at. But this time her voice sounded different, soft, almost hesitant. "Selena," she said, "we've been thinking we don't see you enough. We should change that." I froze because it didn't sound like her. My mother had perfected the art of indifference, the clipped tone of someone who tolerated me more than welcomed me. And now, suddenly, there was warmth. Too much warmth. It dripped from her voice like honey laid on too thick. 2 days later, my father called, which was even more unusual. He spoke about how family was important, how we should all stick together more. He talked about Sunday dinners and catching up, about wanting me to feel included. But behind the carefully chosen words, I heard something else. Not affection, not love, curiosity. A hunger even. As if they'd heard something about me, and now they were circling back to see what had changed. And then came Clarissa. A text, out of nowhere. "Hey, we should hang out. I miss you." Those were her exact words, with a heart emoji tacked on for good measure. I stared at it for a long time, almost laughing at the absurdity. The same sister who sneered across a table and told everyone my boyfriend must be poor and ugly now wanted to grab lunch. The same sister who built her glow by mocking me suddenly wanted closeness. It wasn't hard to piece together. The whispers I'd heard about her shaky relationship, her financial struggles, her image starting to crumble, it all made sense now. The timing was too perfect. Their sudden warmth wasn't born of love, it was born of desperation. And perhaps curiosity. They had spent years ignoring me, dismissing me, assuming I was struggling, invisible, small. But now, maybe they had seen something. Photos, a glimpse of my life, a rumor they couldn't verify. Something that made them realize I wasn't the version of me they'd mocked for so long. The irony burned. For years I longed for their approval, their attention, their love. And now that I no longer needed it, now that I had built a life without them, they were reaching out. They wanted to see me more. They wanted closeness now that they suspected I had something worth envying. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't scream or expose them. I simply listened, smiled to myself, and let them talk. Because I knew the truth they didn't. They weren't pulling me back in. I wasn't their shadow anymore, desperate for scraps of affection. Their sudden sweetness didn't move me. It only confirmed what I already knew. They didn't miss me. They missed the chance to control the narrative. And that chance was gone. The next family gathering was just like all the others on the surface. The long dining table was crowded with dishes, glasses clinking, voices overlapping in bursts of laughter. Clarissa was in her usual spot, commanding attention with stories I'd heard a dozen times before. My parents beaming like she was the sun holding our world together. It was the same performance, the same script I'd sat through for years, except this time, I wasn't walking in alone. When I stepped through the door with Adrian at my side, the room shifted. He didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough, tall, poised, the kind of man who made heads turn without trying. He reached for my hand casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the simple gesture carried a weight my family couldn't ignore. My mother's smile faltered. My father straightened in his chair. Clarissa's eyes narrowed, the smirk on her lips slipping before she could stop it. "Everyone," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is Adrian." He gave them that easy smile of his, polite and warm, but with an undertone of confidence that needed no approval. My father stammered out a greeting. My mother tried to recover with questions about how we'd met, her voice too sweet, too sharp around the edges. And Clarissa? She stayed quiet for the first time I could remember, her eyes scanning him like she was searching for flaws and finding none. The silence that followed his introduction was almost sweeter than any words I could have planned. The same table that had once erupted in laughter at Clarissa's cruel joke, "Her boyfriend must be poor and ugly," was now frozen, every assumption shattered. Adrian shook hands, answered their questions with ease, and then turned his attention back to me in ways that left no doubt about where his heart was. When I spoke, he listened. When I laughed, he laughed with me. Every gesture was a quiet declaration. I was loved, respected, chosen. I caught Clarissa's reflection in the glass of the china cabinet across the room. The envy on her face was unmistakable. Her perfect mask cracked, and for once, she wasn't the one being admired. Her stories about glamorous vacations and picture-perfect moments suddenly felt small next to the reality standing beside me. She had spent years mocking me, feeding on the idea that I'd always be less, always be invisible. But now the contrast was undeniable, and it left her grasping for air. Dinner went on, but the dynamic was changed. My parents tried to salvage the illusion, asking Adrian polite questions about his work, his travels, his life. He answered with humility, never boasting, yet every sentence revealed the kind of success and confidence they had never expected me to bring into the room, and I sat there, no longer the butt of their jokes, no longer the shadow in Clarissa's glow. That night, I didn't need to say much. The reveal wasn't in my words. It was in my life, standing right beside me. Their laughter had died. Clarissa's smirk had vanished. And for the first time, I held the upper hand without even lifting a finger. I sat back in my chair, fork resting against the edge of my plate, and just watched. For years, I had been the invisible one at this table, the quiet background presence while Clarissa basked in attention. Tonight was different. Tonight, their eyes weren't on her, they were on Adrian. My parents leaned in eagerly, asking him question after question. Where had he traveled recently? What kind of work did he do? What was it like running his business? And he answered with that calm charm I loved, never arrogant, never showing off. But every word he spoke was enough to unravel the lie they had always believed about me. My mother nodded so hard I thought her pearls might snap off their string. My father, usually disinterested in anything I brought up, couldn't stop smiling. And then there was Clarissa. She sat stiff in her chair, smile frozen, her wineglass trembling just slightly in her hand. She tried to interject, tried to steer the conversation back to herself, but every time she spoke, it fell flat. No one was paying attention to her. They were too focused on the man sitting beside me, the man she had once declared must be poor and ugly. I didn't need to rub it in. Her silence and tight jaw said everything. The envy was so thick I could almost taste it. What made the moment sweeter wasn't Adrian's wealth or his looks. It was the way he treated me. Every time I spoke, he turned toward me fully, his eyes warm, his expression attentive. When I laughed, he laughed with me. When my parents asked a question about us, he never answered, as if he were the only one who mattered. He always included me, always highlighted me. "We love traveling," he said at one point, his hand brushing mine under the table. "Selena always finds the best little hidden places. She has a way of noticing what others miss." The room shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, my family saw me as more than a shadow. They saw me as chosen, as cherished, and Clarissa couldn't bear it. I caught her glaring at me when she thought no one was looking. All those years, she had built herself up by tearing me down. And now, she was the one drowning in silence, her so-called shine eclipsed by the truth she could no longer deny. She had underestimated me. They all had. And now, without me saying a single cruel word in return, their laughter had turned to awe, and Clarissa's smirk to envy. That night, as dessert was served and the conversation continued around me, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to prove anything more. I had already won. Because the real victory wasn't in Adrian's success. It was in the fact that I no longer craved their approval, their validation, or their scraps of affection. They laughed at me for being unworthy. But I was never the joke. I was the one they underestimated, and that's what makes this moment priceless. Did you enjoy the story? If so, please let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to support us. Thanks for watching.